Pack your bags and stay home, Margaret. You're too old for this trip. Those words still echo in my mind. But what I did next, the postcards I sent from Rome, the secret I uncovered in Florence, and the confrontation that followed, left my entire family speechless. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Stay until the very end of the story, and please comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far my journey has reached. At 70 years old, I never imagined my own son would try to cage me like this, or that the woman who smiled at me across the dinner table would be plotting something far worse than I could have ever imagined. The kitchen of my son's townhouse in Portland smelled like rosemary and disappointment. I stood at the granite counter, watching my hands tremble slightly as I arranged fresh vegetables on the cutting board. Not from age, my hands were still steady enough to thread a needle or paint watercolors, but from the tension that had been building in this house for the past 3 months. My son, Theodore, sat at the breakfast nook scrolling through his tablet, his face illuminated by the blue glow of whatever business reports consumed his attention these days. At 42, he'd become someone I barely recognized. The boy who used to beg me to take him camping, who'd once cried watching a documentary about elephants, had transformed into a man who measured everything in spreadsheets and profit margins. But it wasn't Theodore who made my stomach knot with anxiety. It was her. Vivienne Laurent swept into the kitchen like she owned it, which technically she did. Half of it, anyway. She was Theodore's fiancée, though they'd been living together for 2 years without setting a wedding date. At 38, she was beautiful in that carefully maintained way that required personal trainers, estheticians, and a budget I couldn't fathom. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and even at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, she wore cream-colored athleisure that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Margaret," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar mix of sweetness and condescension I'd come to recognize over the past year. "You're still working on breakfast? We have that important meeting with the wedding planner at 11. "Almost done," I replied, keeping my voice light. "The frittata just needs another 5 minutes." I'd moved in with Theodore and Vivienne 3 months ago after a small fire in my apartment building had left me temporarily displaced. What was supposed to be a 2-week arrangement had stretched on, and somewhere along the way, I'd gone from house guest to something that felt uncomfortably close to live-in help. "Make sure you use the good plates," Vivienne added, pulling a green smoothie from the refrigerator. "The Wedgwood ones, not those everyday dishes. I want everything to look perfect when Celeste arrives." Celeste was Vivienne's mother, a woman who made her daughter look warm and approachable by comparison. She was flying in from Quebec City for the wedding planning session, and the entire household had been in upheaval for days preparing for her visit. Theodore finally looked up from his tablet. "Mom, after breakfast, could you tidy up the guest room one more time? Celeste is very particular about thread count and the arrangement of toiletries." I nodded, swallowing the words I wanted to say. I'd already cleaned that guest room twice. The sheets were fresh, the towels were precisely folded, and I even put a small vase of lavender on the nightstand because Vivienne mentioned her mother liked the scent. The frittata came out perfect. Golden edges, fluffy center, herbs distributed evenly throughout. I plated it on the Wedgwood china, added fresh fruit, and brought it to the dining room where Theodore and Vivienne had settled. "Thank you, Margaret," Theodore said absently, already cutting into his portion. Vivienne took a bite and wrinkled her nose slightly. "It's a bit bland, don't you think? Celeste prefers food with more sophistication." I'd used fresh herbs from the garden, organic eggs, imported Gruyere cheese, but I bit back my defense and simply said, "I'll keep that in mind." As I returned to the kitchen to clean up, I heard Vivienne's voice drift from the dining room. "We really need to talk about the Italy situation, Theo." My hand stilled over the sink. Italy, the trip I'd been planning for 8 months. "What about it?" Theodore asked. "Well, with the wedding coming up and Celeste staying for a while, it would be so helpful to have your mother here. She's been wonderful with all the household tasks, and honestly, I can't imagine managing everything without an extra pair of hands." I stood frozen, soap suds dripping from my fingers. "Mom's been looking forward to that trip for months," Theodore said, but his voice lacked conviction. I know, and it's sweet, really, but Theodore, be realistic. She's 70 years old, 3 weeks traveling alone in Italy. What if she gets lost or falls or has a medical emergency? Mom's in excellent health. For now. But at her age, things can change so quickly. And think about the expense. Wouldn't that money be better used for something practical? We could help her find a nicer apartment, maybe one closer to us, so we can keep an eye on her. I gripped the edge of the counter. That trip to Italy had cost me $4,200. Every penny from the small inheritance my sister had left me when she passed away 2 years ago. Frances had always dreamed of going to Italy, but never made it. Before she died, she'd made me promise to take the trip for both of us.
I don't know, Viv, Theodore said. It seems important to her. Of course it's important to her. She's from a generation that didn't get to travel much. But she's also from a generation that put family first, that understood sacrifice. If she really loves you, she'll understand that you need her here right now. The manipulation was so smooth, I almost admired it. Almost. I heard Theodore sigh. Let me think about it. Don't think too long, darling. Her flight is in 2 weeks. We need to cancel it soon if we want any chance of getting a refund. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I scrubbed the pan with unnecessary force, the steel wool scratching against the copper bottom like my anger scratching against my composure. That evening, Theodore found me in the small den that had become my temporary bedroom. I was looking through my Italy guidebook, a thick volume with dog-eared pages and handwritten notes in the margins. I'd marked every museum, every cathedral, every small trattoria that Frances and I had dreamed about visiting. Mom, can we talk? I set the book aside. Of course, sweetheart. He sat down heavily in the armchair across from me, looking more like a guilty teenager than a successful corporate consultant. It's about your trip. I heard the conversation at breakfast. His face reddened. You weren't supposed to... we were just discussing... It's fine, Theodore. These walls are thin. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mom, I'm worried about you traveling alone. You've never done an international trip by yourself. What if something goes wrong? I'll have my phone. I'll check in regularly. I've already researched hospitals in each city, and I have travel insurance. But why now? Why not wait until after the wedding? You could even come with us on our honeymoon. We're thinking about the Mediterranean. Your honeymoon is 8 months away, Theodore. My trip is in 2 weeks, and I've been planning it for nearly a year. Your Aunt Frances made me promise. Aunt Frances is dead, Mom. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, and he immediately looked ashamed. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I just mean, you don't owe a promise to someone who's gone. I owe it to myself, I said quietly, and I owe it to the memory of my sister who gave me this gift with her last dollars. Theodore ran his hands through his hair. Vivian really needs help with the wedding preparations. Her mother is going to be here, and you know how demanding Celeste can be. It would mean so much to both of us if you could postpone the trip. Postpone or cancel? Just postpone. Take it next year, maybe, or the year after. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised alone after his father walked out when Theodore was 6. I'd worked double shifts as a nurse to keep him in good schools. I'd driven him to soccer practice, helped him with college applications, co-signed his first apartment lease. I celebrated every achievement and comforted him through every failure. And now, he was asking me to give up a dream, not for an emergency, not for a crisis, but because his fiancée needed help addressing wedding invitations and choosing napkin colors. I'm going to Italy, Theodore. His jaw tightened. Mom, please be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm a 70-year-old woman who has worked hard her entire life, who raised a son on her own, who's never asked you for anything except perhaps to understand that I'm still a person with my own dreams and desires. This isn't about your dreams, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. This is about being practical. You're not a young woman anymore. Solo travel at your age is risky. Your grandmother traveled solo until she was 84. That was different. How? He stood up, pacing the small room. Look, I don't want to fight about this, but I think you're being selfish. Vivian and I are starting our life together. This is an important time for our family, and we need your support. I have your support, but support doesn't mean sacrificing everything I want for your convenience. Your convenience? His voice rose. We've opened our home to you for 3 months. We've given you a place to stay, fed you, included you in our lives. And I've cooked, cleaned, run errands, and made myself useful in every way I could think of. I haven't been a burden. I've been a help. That's not what I meant, isn't it? We stared at each other across the small room, and I saw something shift in his eyes, a hardness that reminded me uncomfortably of his father. Fine, he said finally. Go to Italy. But don't expect us to drop everything if something goes wrong. Don't expect us to wire you money or fly over to rescue you if you get in trouble. I won't. And don't expect Vivian to be happy about this. She's counting on you. Vivian will survive addressing her own wedding invitations. Theodore walked to the door, then turned back. You know what, Mom? Sometimes I wonder if you even like Vivian. You've never really warmed up to her. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I didn't dislike Vivian. I didn't know her well enough to dislike her, but I didn't trust her either. There was something calculated in how she moved through the world, something transactional in how she related to people. I want you to be happy, I said carefully. If Vivian makes you happy, then I'm happy. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I have right now.
He left without another word, and I sat alone in the den, my Italy guidebook heavy in my lap. Through the wall, I could hear Theodore and Vivian's voices, muffled but clearly arguing. I caught fragments. Stubborn, inconsiderate, her age, our wedding. I opened the guidebook to the section on Rome and traced my finger over the walking tour I'd planned from the Colosseum to the Trevi Fountain. Frances had always wanted to throw a coin in that fountain. She'd said it with such conviction, Margaret, promise me, if I don't make it there, you throw a coin for me. Make a wish for both of us. I'd made that promise while holding her hand in the hospice, watching cancer steal her away piece by piece. And I intended to keep it, no matter what obstacles my son and his fiancée placed in my path. The next morning, Celeste Laurent arrived like an approaching storm system. She was a tall, angular woman in her early 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe bob and the kind of posture that suggested she'd spent years in deportment classes. Everything about her screamed old money and new disdain. Margaret, she said, looking me up and down as if I were a sofa she was considering purchasing. How quaint! Vivian mentioned you were staying here temporarily. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Laurent. I extended my hand. She looked at it for a beat too long before offering a limp handshake. It's Madame Laurent, actually. I kept my title after the divorce. Of course she did. The wedding planning session began at noon, and I'd been specifically instructed to prepare a lunch that would impress without seeming like we're trying too hard. After 3 attempts at finding the right balance, I'd settled on a niçoise salad, fresh baguette, and a light lemon tart for dessert. I served it in the dining room, where Celeste, Vivian, and Theodore sat surrounded by fabric swatches, flower samples, and thick binders of wedding options. The wedding planner, a harried-looking woman named Jessica, was taking notes on a tablet while Vivian described her vision. Elegant but not stuffy, classic but not boring. I want people to remember this wedding for years. As long as they remember it was expensive, Celeste added with a laugh that sounded like ice cubes in a glass. I set the plates down as unobtrusively as possible, but Celeste immediately cut into her salad and made a small noise of disapproval. "The tuna is overcooked," she announced. It wasn't. I'd seared it perfectly to medium rare, but I simply nodded and said, "I'm sorry. Can I prepare something else for you?" No, I'll manage." She said it with the martyred air of someone enduring a great hardship. As I returned to the kitchen, I heard Vivian whisper something to her mother. Then Celeste's voice, not quite as quiet as she probably thought she was. "Is she always here? I mean, darling, I know she's Theodore's mother, but having her underfoot during such an important time must be exhausting." "She's actually been quite helpful," Theodore said, and I felt a small spark of gratitude. "Helpful?" Celeste's laugh was sharper this time. "Darling boy, she's 70 years old. How helpful can she really be?" I gripped the counter, breathing slowly through my nose. "Actually, Celeste, that's something we wanted to discuss with you," Vivian said. "Margaret has this trip to Italy." "How adventurous," Celeste interrupted, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "The thing is," Vivian continued, "the timing is terrible. We really need her here for the wedding preparations, and honestly, I'm concerned about her traveling alone at her age." "Oh, absolutely," Celeste agreed. "My mother tried to go to Prague alone when she was 68, and it was a disaster. She got confused at the train station and ended up in the wrong city. We had to send my brother to collect her. It was humiliating for everyone." "Exactly," Vivian said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "That's what we've been trying to explain to her, but she's quite stubborn about it." "Of course she is. Old people often are. They can't accept that they're not capable of the things they used to do." The casual dismissal of my entire personhood, reducing me to old people and she, made something crack inside my chest. I left the kitchen and walked quietly to my room, closing the door and leaning against it. For the first time since moving into this house, I let myself cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but silent tears that ran down my face and dripped onto my blouse. I cried for Frances, who would never see Italy. I cried for the younger version of myself who had believed her son would always be her ally. And I cried for the 70-year-old woman I'd become, who was still vibrant and capable and full of dreams, but who everyone seemed determined to treat as if she were already halfway to the grave. That evening, after Celeste had retired to the guest room and Theodore had gone for a run, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Vivian. She was pouring herself a glass of white wine, and she poured a second glass without asking and slid it across the counter to me. "We should talk," she said. I took the glass, but didn't drink. "About what?" "About your trip, about your place here, about expectations." "My place here?" I repeated carefully. Vivian settled onto one of the kitchen stools, crossing her long legs. "Margaret, let's be honest with each other. This arrangement, you living here, it's worked out well, hasn't it? It's been temporary, has it? Your apartment building is still under renovation. They're saying it might be another 3 months before residents can move back in." "I didn't know that." A flutter of panic moved through my chest. "I can find somewhere else."
Don't be silly. You're Theodore's mother. Of course you'll stay here. She took a sip of wine. "But perhaps we should discuss what that looks like moving forward." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've been incredibly helpful these past few months. The cooking, the cleaning, the organizing. You have a real gift for household management. And with the wedding coming up and Theo's career becoming more demanding, we could really use that kind of support on a more permanent basis." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "You want me to stay here as, what, your housekeeper?" "Not a housekeeper," Vivian said quickly. "Family, but family who contributes in meaningful ways. We'd take care of you, of course. You'd have a room, meals, everything you need. And you'd help maintain the household.
It's really quite a good arrangement when you think about it. And my trip to Italy? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I think we both know that trip isn't practical right now. Maybe next year, when things are more settled? Things will never be more settled, I said quietly. There will always be something. The wedding, then maybe a baby, then another baby. There will always be a reason why it's not the right time. Margaret, you're being dramatic. I'm being honest. You want me to give up my dreams to make your life easier. Vivian's expression hardened. I want you to be realistic about your capabilities and your situation. You're a 70-year-old woman with limited means living in your son's house. That trip to Italy represents financial irresponsibility when you should be saving for medical expenses and end-of-life care. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. End-of-life care? I'm 70, not dying. Yet? She took another sip of wine. Look, I'm trying to help you see this clearly. Theodore loves you, but he also has a life to build with me. We need support from family, not additional burdens. If you insist on this selfish trip, you're basically telling us that your fleeting pleasure is more important than our future together. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Margaret, and the sooner you accept your role in this family, the happier everyone will be. I set down the wine glass I'd never drunk from. What exactly do you think my role is? She looked surprised by the question, as if the answer should be obvious. To support us, to make our lives easier, to be useful in whatever ways you can be useful. That's what family does. And if I'm not useful? The silence that followed was answer enough. I left her in the kitchen and returned to my room, where my Italy guidebook sat on the nightstand, a silent witness to the battle being waged over my autonomy. I picked it up and held it against my chest like a shield. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the small bed, listening to the house settle around me, and thought about Frances. She'd been the brave one, the adventurous one. She'd backpacked through South America in her 20s, taught English in Japan in her 30s, learned to surf in her 40s. Cancer had stolen that vibrant life too soon, but she'd never let anyone cage her spirit. I'm going, Frances, I whispered into the darkness. I'm going, and I'm throwing that coin for both of us. The decision felt like both a rebellion and a homecoming. The next few days were filled with cold silences and pointed remarks. Theodore barely spoke to me. Vivian's politeness became glacial. Even Celeste, still residing in the guest room like an occupying force, would make comments about people who don't understand family obligations whenever I was within earshot. But I kept packing. In the privacy of my small room, I folded clothes into my suitcase, checked and rechecked my documents, and reviewed my itinerary. Rome, Florence, Venice, the Amalfi Coast. 3 weeks of art and history and beauty. 3 weeks of freedom. 2 days before my flight, Theodore tried one more time. Mom, please, I'm asking you not as your son, but as someone who cares about you. Don't go. We were in the living room. Vivian sat on the sofa, watching with her arms crossed. Celeste was present too, a silent judge in her throne of disapproval. I'm going, Theodore. Then don't expect to come back to this house, Vivian said quietly. Vivian, Theodore started, but she cut him off. No, Theo. I'm done being polite about this. Your mother has made her choice. She'd rather gadding about Europe than help her own family. Fine, but she can't have it both ways. She can't be selfish and still expect us to provide for her. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his fiancée that she'd crossed a line. But he just stared at the floor, his jaw working, but no words coming out. I see. So it's an ultimatum. Give up my trip or lose my home? You're choosing to frame it that way, Vivian replied. I'm simply saying that we need to know where your priorities lie, with yourself or with this family. Celeste nodded approvingly. Vivian is being more than generous, Margaret. In my day, elders understood their place.
Something inside me, something that had been bending and bending under the weight of their expectations, finally snapped back into its proper shape. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm 70 years old. I've earned the right to be selfish. I've spent decades putting other people first. My son, my patients, my sister during her illness. I've sacrificed and compromised and accommodated. And now for the first time in my life, I'm going to do something just for me." I looked at my son, really looked at him, trying to find the boy I'd raised somewhere in this stranger's face.
I love you, Theodore. I always will, but I'm going to Italy. And if that means I'm not welcome in this house anymore, then I'll find somewhere else to live. Because I'd rather be homeless and free than caged in comfort. I left them sitting there, walked to my room, and finished packing. 2 days later, as my plane lifted off the tarmac, I pressed my face to the window and watched Portland disappear below me. In my purse was Francis's photograph, my passport, and a heart full of determination. I was going to Italy, and whatever came after, whatever consequences I'd face when I returned, would be worth it. Behind me lay the wreckage of what I'd thought was family. Ahead lay the unknown. But for the first time in 3 months, I could breathe. The Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino Airport greeted me with chaos and beauty in equal measure. After 14 hours of travel, Portland to New York to Rome, I stumbled through customs with my rolling suitcase and a heart that felt simultaneously liberated and terrified. The Italian sun hit me like a warm embrace as I stepped outside the terminal. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the reality of what I'd done wash over me. I was here, in Rome, at 70 years old, alone, having just burned my bridges with my only child. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since we landed. 7 missed calls from Theodore, 12 text messages, which I hadn't opened yet. I silenced the device and dropped it into my purse. This was my time. Whatever guilt trip they were attempting could wait. The taxi ride into central Rome was a blur of ancient ruins glimpsed between modern buildings, of impossible traffic patterns that seemed to operate on some chaotic principle I couldn't quite grasp. The driver, a cheerful man named Luca, who looked to be in his 60s, chatted with me in heavily accented English about his grandchildren and the best gelato shops in the city. "You come to Rome before?" he asked, navigating a roundabout with the confidence of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "First time," I admitted. "Ah, first time is special. You will fall in love. Everyone falls in love with Roma." He gestured expansively with one hand, the other barely gripping the wheel. "Where do you stay?" "A small hotel near the Pantheon, the Albergo del Senato." "Excellent choice. Very central. You can walk everywhere from there." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You travel alone?" "Yes." "Brava. My wife, she says I should be more like the American ladies, independent, strong. Me, I say she is already too independent." He laughed heartily at his own joke. By the time we reached the hotel, I felt some of the tension from the past few days beginning to loosen its grip on my shoulders. The Albergo del Senato was a modest but charming building, tucked into a narrow street, its entrance marked by a blue awning and window boxes overflowing with geraniums. The room was small, a bed, a wardrobe, a tiny bathroom with a shower that looked like it might require an engineering degree to operate, but the window opened onto a view of terracotta rooftops and, in the distance, the dome of the Pantheon catching the afternoon light. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The tears came suddenly and forcefully. I cried for Theodore, for the relationship we'd lost somewhere along the way. I cried for the loneliness that had been my constant companion since Francis died. I cried because I was 70 and scared and alone in a foreign country, and part of me wondered if Vivian had been right, if I was being foolish and irresponsible. But then I looked out that window at the Rome rooftops, at the ancient city that had survived emperors and wars and centuries of human drama, and I thought, if Rome can reinvent itself over and over, so can I. I wiped my eyes, unpacked my suitcase with the methodical care of someone establishing a temporary home, and pulled out the small leather journal Frances had given me years ago. For your Italian adventure, she had written on the first page. Fill it with stories worth telling. I opened it to the first blank page and wrote, Day 1. I made it. I'm terrified and exhilarated and heartbroken and free. Tomorrow, I start exploring. Tonight, I'm just going to be proud of myself for getting here. That first evening, I ventured out cautiously, walking the narrow streets around my hotel with Frances's guidebook in hand. The city at dusk was magical, streetlights beginning to glow, the sound of Italian conversations spilling from open windows, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes and fresh bread mixing with the scent of old stone. I found a small trattoria tucked into a side street, the kind of place that clearly catered to locals rather than tourists. The owner, a stout woman with steel-gray hair and a commanding presence, took one look at me standing uncertainly in the doorway and waved me inside. Sola, she asked. Alone. Si, I replied, using one of the few Italian words I'd memorized. She sat me at a small table near the window and brought me a menu that was entirely in Italian. I pointed randomly at something that looked like it might be pasta, and she nodded approvingly, disappearing into what I assumed was the kitchen. What arrived 20 minutes later was a revelation. Fresh pappardelle with a wild boar ragu that tasted like the forest itself had been captured in sauce form. It was rich and earthy and complex, and with each bite, I felt more grounded in my decision to come here.
Mine said I was wasting my children's inheritance, Yuki added dryly. I told her she could inherit what's left when I'm done living. The stories went on, each one a variation on the same theme. Women who'd spent their lives being useful, being appropriate, being what everyone else needed them to be, finally claiming the right to be themselves. Why do you think they do it? I asked. Our children, I mean. Why do they try so hard to keep us small and contained? Carmen swirled the wine in her glass thoughtfully. Fear, mostly. We represent their future, and if we're still vital and independent in our 70s, it means they might have to be responsible for their own lives instead of blaming their limitations on age. Plus, Linda added, there's the uncomfortable truth that we're sexual, adventurous, and alive in ways that make them confront their own mortality. It's easier to see us as fragile grandmothers who need protecting than as complete human beings who still have desires and dreams. My son told me that at 70, I should be thinking about end-of-life care, not gallivanting around Europe, I said quietly. The table fell silent for a moment. Then Diane raised her glass. To gallivanting, to refusing to die before we're actually dead, to being inconveniently alive. We all raised our glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by women I'd met just hours ago, I felt less alone than I had in years. That evening, I walked back to my hotel along the Tiber River, watching the sun set over the city in shades of gold and rose. My feet ached pleasantly from hours of walking, and my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I turned on my phone long enough to send a single message to Theodore. I'm having the most wonderful time. I've made friends. I'm seeing incredible things. I'm sorry you can't be happy for me, but I'm happy for myself. That will have to be enough. His response came within minutes. Vivian wants me to tell you not to bother coming back to the house when you return. You've made your choice. I read it twice, feeling the intended sting of rejection. Then I thought about Diane's words, fuck 'em, and realized that I'd already survived the worst they could do to me. They'd tried to cage me, tried to make me small and useful and grateful, and I'd chosen freedom instead. I typed a final message. I'll make other arrangements. Enjoy your wedding. I hope you'll both be very happy. Then I blocked both Theodore's and Vivian's numbers, put my phone away, and went to find gelato. The next few days passed in a blur of art and architecture and moments of transcendent beauty. I stood in front of Caravaggio's paintings in the church of San Luigi dei Francesi and wept at the way light could be captured on canvas. I climbed the Spanish stairs at sunrise before the crowds arrived and watched Rome wake up in layers of pale gold light.
I got lost in Trastevere streets and found a tiny bookshop run by an elderly man who spoke no English, but sold me a collection of Italian poetry anyway, inscribing the inside cover with Per la signora coraggiosa, for the courageous lady. I met Diane and the others for dinner most evenings, and our conversations ranged from profound to ridiculous. We talked about art and history, about our children and our regrets, about the lovers we'd had and the ones we wished we'd had. We laughed until we couldn't breathe, and sometimes we cried into our wine about the years we'd wasted trying to be what others wanted. On my 5th day in Rome, I did something I'd been building up courage for. I bought a postcard. It was a simple card, showing the Trevi fountain at night, all lit up and magical. I sat at a cafe with an espresso and Francis's journal, trying to decide what to write. Finally, I settled on this. Theodore and Vivian, greetings from Rome. The weather is beautiful, the food is incredible, and I'm having the most wonderful time. I've made wonderful friends and seen incredible things. I threw a coin in the Trevi fountain today for Aunt Frances, and I made a wish for all of us, that we might each find the courage to live authentically, even when it disappoints others. I hope you're well and that wedding planning is going smoothly. With love, Mom. I addressed it to Theodore's house and mailed it from the post office near the Piazza Navono. It felt like a small act of rebellion, sending cheerful postcards from the trip they'd tried to prevent me from taking. So I decided to send more. Over the next week, as I explored every corner of Rome, I bought postcards. Lots of them. The Colosseum, the Roman Forum, the Sistine Chapel, the Borghese Gardens. And on each one, I wrote brief, cheerful messages about my adventures, never mentioning the conflict that had brought me here, just celebrating the beauty and freedom I was experiencing. Having aperitivo in Campo di Fiori, the sun is setting and the piazza is full of life. Wish you could see it. Visited the Borghese Gallery today. Bernini sculptures are even more incredible in person. The Apollo and Daphne made me understand transformation in a new way. I got lost trying to find my hotel, ended up having the best meal of my life in a tiny trattoria with no name. Sometimes getting lost is the best way to find something wonderful. I mailed one every day, imagining Vivian's face as we arrived, one after another, proof that I was not just surviving, but thriving without them.
It was petty, perhaps, but it was also honest. I was having the time of my life. On my 10th day in Rome, something unexpected happened. I was sitting at my favorite cafe near the Pantheon, writing in Francis's journal and sipping an espresso, when my phone, which I'd started turning on once a day to check for emergencies, buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. Hello? Mrs. Margaret Hartwell? The voice was professional, female, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Yes? My name is Sophia Chen. I'm an attorney with Morrison & Associates in Portland. I'm calling about a financial matter concerning your son, Theodore Hartwell, and his fiancée, Vivian Laurent. My stomach dropped. Is Theodore okay? Has something happened? He's fine, physically, but there's a situation that's developed that I believe you should be aware of. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I moved to a quieter corner of the cafe. Yes, what's this about? I represent Celeste Laurent, Vivian's mother. She's contacted our firm because she's discovered some irregularities in her financial accounts, specifically large transfers that she didn't authorize and can't account for. The world seemed to slow down around me. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Mother Laurent gave Vivian power of attorney over some of her accounts about 2 years ago to help manage her investments while she traveled. Vivian also has access to several joint accounts that were established for wedding planning purposes. Over the past 8 months, there have been substantial withdrawals and transfers from these accounts, over $120,000 in total. I sat down heavily. And you think Vivian took this money? We have evidence suggesting that's exactly what happened. The transfers went to accounts controlled by Vivian and Theodore. But here's where it concerns you. When we began investigating, we discovered that Vivian had been telling her mother that the money was being used for various family expenses, including supporting Theodore's mother, you.
during a period of financial hardship. The breath left my lungs. That's a lie. I haven't received a penny from them. I've been living in their house because my apartment building had a fire, but I've paid my own way, I've cooked and cleaned, and I stopped, hearing how it sounded. Yes, Sophia said gently, we're beginning to understand the full picture. Mrs. Laurent would like to speak with you, if you're willing. She's quite distressed to learn that you weren't the recipient of the funds that were supposedly being used to support you. Where is Theodore in all this? There was a pause. According to bank records, much of the transferred money went into joint accounts he controls with Vivian. Whether he knew about the fraud or not, he's complicit in receiving stolen funds. I felt like I was falling. My son! My Theodore! A thief? Mrs. Hartwell, are you still there? Yes, I'm sorry. I need time to process this. Of course. I should tell you that Mrs. Laurent intends to pursue criminal charges if the money isn't returned immediately. Given your relationship to Theodore, I wanted to give you a heads up before things proceed legally. What do you need from me? Nothing right now, but if you're willing, Mrs. Laurent would like to speak with you directly. She has some questions about your living situation with Theodore and Vivian that might be relevant to the case. I agreed to call Celeste the next day and ended the conversation feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. The woman who'd looked at me like furniture, who'd made casual comments about old people not knowing their capabilities, that woman had been robbed by her own daughter. And my son had helped do it. That evening, I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on the beauty around me. I sat in my small hotel room and tried to reconcile the Theodore I'd raised with the man who would steal from an elderly woman. Had I missed signs? Had I been so focused on my own hurt feelings about how they'd treated me that I'd overlooked something more sinister? I thought about Vivian's words. You're a 70-year-old woman with limited means living in your son's house. The way she'd framed my presence there, as if I were a charity case rather than a temporary houseguest. Had she been building a narrative to justify the theft, using my presence as cover for her crimes? And Theodore, my Theodore, who'd stood by silently while his fiancée manipulated and diminished me, who'd pressured me to give up this trip, who'd sent that final cruel text about abandoning my apartment. Had he been trying to keep me close and under control because I might have discovered what they were doing? Had all of it, the pressure to stay, the insistence that I was too old to travel, the attempt to make me feel useful and necessary, been about maintaining their fraud? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit together in a way that made me sick. I called Diane. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and slightly wine-soaked. Margaret, we missed you at dinner. Everything okay? I need advice, I said, and my voice cracked on the words. 20 minutes later, she was at my hotel room door with a bottle of wine and Patricia in tow. I told them everything. The phone call from the attorney, the stolen money, my growing suspicion that I had been used as an unknowing accomplice in elder abuse. Jesus Christ, Patricia said when I finished. And here I thought my kids were bad for trying to guilt trip me into babysitting. What are you going to do? Diane asked.
I don't know. Celeste Laurent isn't exactly my favorite person. She was awful to me when I met her. But she didn't deserve this. No one deserves to be robbed by their own family, Patricia said firmly. And if your son was involved, knowing or not, he needs to face consequences. He's my son. He's also an adult who made choices, Diane countered gently. You can love him and still hold him accountable. We talked late into the night, the three of us, working through the ethical maze of what I should do. By the time Diane and Patricia left, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called Celeste Laurent. Margaret. Her voice was stiff, formal. Thank you for taking my call. Mrs. Laurent. Please, call me Celeste. I think we're past formalities at this point. Celeste, then. I want you to know that I had no idea about any of this. I never received any money from Vivian or Theodore. I believe you. My attorney has been very thorough in tracing the funds, and none of them went anywhere near your accounts. She paused. I owe you an apology. When I met you at Theodore's house, I made certain assumptions about your situation and your character. I was unkind. You were, I agreed. But that doesn't mean you deserved what they did to you. No, she said, hardened. It doesn't. They made me feel like a generous benefactor while they robbed me blind. And they used you, your presence, your perceived financial need, as justification for the transfers. How did you discover it? My financial advisor was doing a routine review and noticed the pattern of withdrawals. When he asked about them, I had no memory of authorizing most of them. We started digging deeper and she trailed off. It's humiliating to be made a fool by your own daughter. I understand that feeling. There was a long silence. Then Celeste said, I'm going to press charges. Both of them. I wanted you to know before it becomes public. I understand. Do you? She sounded genuinely curious. He's your son. Most mothers would try to protect their children even when they've done terrible things. I love my son, I said slowly, but I won't protect him from the consequences of his choices. If he did this, and it sounds like he did, then he needs to be held accountable. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, Celeste said quietly. I'm 70 years old and sitting in a hotel room in Rome, having the adventure my son tried to prevent me from having. I'm a lot of things, but weak isn't one of them. For the first time in our acquaintance, I heard Celeste Laurent laugh. It was a genuine sound, without the sharp edges I'd heard before. No, she agreed. I don't think it is. We talked for another hour. She told me the full extent of what she'd discovered. Not just the transfers, but forged signatures on investment documents, lies about account balances, and a systematic pattern of financial manipulation that had been going on for over a year. The wedding was going to be expensive, Celeste said. Vivian kept pushing for bigger, more elaborate plans. I thought I was helping her achieve her dreams. Instead, she was robbing me to fund a fantasy. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'd rather know the truth than continue living in ignorance thinking I had a loving daughter when I really had a thief. She paused. What will you do when you come back to Portland? I don't know. My apartment building is still being renovated. I don't have anywhere to go. I have a guest house on my property. It's small, but it's private and fully furnished. You're welcome to stay there while you figure things out. No rent, no obligations. Consider it my apology for how I treated you. I'm stunned. That's incredibly generous. It's practical. You'll likely need to give a statement to the police about your living situation with Theodora and Vivian. Having you nearby will make that easier. And she hesitated. I could use someone around who understands what it's like to be betrayed by people you loved. I'll think about it. Thank you. After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking out at the Rome rooftops, trying to process everything that had happened. My son was a thief, his fiancée was a con artist, and I'd been the unwitting cover for their crimes. But I'd escaped by insisting on this trip, by refusing to be caged in their comfortable prison. I'd removed myself from their web of lies. If I'd stayed, if I'd given in to their pressure, I would have become even more entangled in their fraud. I opened Frances's journal and wrote, Day 10. Everything has changed. The family I thought I had doesn't exist. The son I raised has become someone I don't recognize. But I'm still here, still free, still seeing the world I dreamed of seeing. Frances, I hope you're proud of me. I'm finally learning to put myself first, and it turns out that's not selfish. It's survival. That afternoon, I bought another postcard. This one showed the Bocca della Verità, the mouth of truth, that ancient marble face that legend says will bite off the hand of anyone who lies. I addressed it to Theodore and wrote, The mouth of truth reminds me that lies always catch up to us eventually. I hope you'll find the courage to tell the truth before it's too late. I still love you, but I can't protect you from the consequences of your choices. Mom.
Did you ever hear Theodore or Miss Laurent discuss Mrs. Laurent's finances? I thought carefully. Vivian mentioned several times that her mother was very wealthy and had been helping them with wedding expenses. She made it sound like Celeste was being generous, not that she was. I didn't know they were stealing from her. When did you leave their residence? 2 weeks ago, right before my flight to Rome. There was a confrontation about this trip. They didn't want me to come. They said if I insisted on going, I shouldn't expect to be welcomed back. Can you elaborate on that confrontation? I described the scene. Vivian's ultimatum, Theodore's silence, the way they'd framed my desire to travel as selfish and irresponsible. As I talked, I heard myself describing a pattern of manipulation and control that I hadn't fully recognized while I was living through it. Mrs. Hartwell, I need to ask you something directly. Your son left you a voicemail asking you to tell investigators that you were receiving financial support from him and Miss Laurent. Did you receive that message? Yes. And is it true? Were you receiving financial support? No, I've never received a penny from them. I paid my own expenses while I was staying there, and I certainly never received any of Celeste Laurent's money. Thank you for your honesty. I should tell you that we have substantial evidence of systematic financial exploitation. Miss Laurent had power of attorney over several of her mother's accounts and made numerous unauthorized transfers totaling over $120,000. Your son's name is on many of the accounts that received these funds. Detective, I have to ask, did Theodore know? Was he actively involved in the theft, or was he just, not paying attention to where the money was coming from? There was a pause. That's what we're trying to determine. But I can tell you that the pattern of transfers suggests coordination. Money would be moved from Mrs. Laurent's accounts to Miss Laurent's business accounts, then almost immediately transferred to joint accounts your son controlled, then withdrawn or used for personal expenses. That level of movement suggests both parties were aware of what was happening. I closed my eyes, fighting against the wave of nausea. What happens now? We'll continue our investigation. Miss Laurent and your son will likely both be charged with multiple felonies: elder abuse, theft, forgery. The district attorney's office is reviewing the evidence now. I wanted to speak with you before we proceed to make sure we have the full picture of your involvement or lack thereof. I wasn't involved, I swear. I believe you, Mrs. Hartwell. In fact, based on what you've told me and what we've learned from other sources, it appears you were also a victim of sorts. They used your presence in their home to justify the transfers to Mrs. Laurent, claiming they were supporting an elderly mother who had fallen on hard times. But I wasn't falling on hard times. I had a small fire in my building. I was there temporarily. They didn't tell Mrs. Laurent that. According to the financial justifications they provided, you were destitute and entirely dependent on them for support. They painted a picture of themselves as generous adult children caring for an incapacitated parent. The manipulation was even more extensive than I had realized. They hadn't just stolen Celeste's money, they'd used my life, my circumstances, my identity as a cover story for their crimes. I feel sick, I said honestly. I understand this is difficult. Take your time in Italy, Mrs. Hartwell. Enjoy your trip. We'll need a formal statement from you when you return, but there's no rush. You're not facing any charges. You're a witness, possibly a victim. After we hung up, I sat in that beautiful Renaissance room and felt the full weight of betrayal settle over me like a heavy blanket. My son had not only stolen from his future mother-in-law, but he'd used me, my age, my temporary housing situation, my very existence as a justification for his crimes. He'd painted me as helpless and dependent to cover up theft. And then, when his lies started unraveling, he tried to get me to confirm those lies, to make myself complicit in elder abuse. I walked to the window and looked out at the Duomo, that magnificent cathedral that had taken over a century to build. All that time, all that effort, all that human dedication to creating something beautiful and lasting. What had Theodore and Vivian built? A house of cards made of lies and stolen money. Pretty on the outside, but rotten at its foundation. I pulled out Frances's journal and wrote, Day 11. I learned today that I was used as an excuse for crimes I didn't know were being committed. My son has become a stranger who would throw his own mother under the bus to save himself. I should feel angry. I do feel angry. But mostly I feel sad. For the boy he was, for the man he could have been, for the relationship we'll never have now. But Frances, I'm also grateful. If I'd stayed, if I'd given into their pressure and canceled this trip, I would be even more entangled in their mess. By choosing myself, by insisting on my freedom, I saved myself from becoming part of their crime. Tomorrow, I'm going to see the David. I'm going to stand in front of that marble giant and remember that sometimes the small defeat the powerful, that sometimes courage looks like an old woman buying a plane ticket, that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be diminished. That evening, I met Diane for dinner at a small osteria in the Ultrarno district. She took one look at my face and ordered us both large glasses of Chianti before I'd even sat down.
Talk, she commanded. I told her everything. The detective's call, the extent of the theft, Theodore's voicemail begging me to lie for him, the discovery that they'd used my situation as cover for their crimes. Diane listened without interrupting, her face growing progressively more outraged. When I finished, she drained her wine glass and signaled for another bottle. That absolute bastard, she said flatly. Using his own mother as a scapegoat. I've heard a lot of terrible stories from women in our situation, Margaret, but this takes the bloody cake. The worst part is that he thinks I'll do it. He actually believes I'll lie to the police to protect him from the consequences of stealing from an old woman. Will you? No. The word came out firm and clear. I love my son, but I won't help him victimize someone else. Celeste Laurent may not be a warm person, but she didn't deserve this. Damn right she didn't. Diane raised her glass. To honesty, to refusing to be used, to old women who won't be pushed around anymore. We clinked glasses, and I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. What will you do when you get back to Portland? Diane asked. Celeste offered me her guest house while I figure things out. I think I'll take her up on it. My apartment building won't be ready for at least another 2 months, and I sure as hell can't stay with Theodore. A guest house sounds lovely, and you'll have an ally there, someone who understands what you're going through. Someone who used to treat me like I was beneath her notice, I added wryly. People change when they realize they've been wrong. Celeste sounds like she's capable of growth. That's more than you can say for your son right now. Over pasta and more wine, we talked about family disappointment, about the strange grief of losing someone who's still alive but has become unrecognizable. Diane told me about her own estrangement from her eldest daughter, who'd cut contact 3 years ago over Diane's decision to sell the family home and use the money to travel. She said I was stealing her inheritance, Diane explained. Never mind that it was my house, my money, my life. She'd already spent it in her head, you see. She'd mentally allocated every dollar to her own future plans. When I dared to use my own resources for my own happiness, she acted like I'd personally robbed her. Do you talk to her now? Christmas cards. Very formal. Dear Mother, hope you're well. Love, Sarah. Like I'm a distant acquaintance rather than the woman who gave birth to her. Diane shrugged, but I could see the pain in her eyes. You learn to live with it. The loss becomes part of your landscape. Not something that goes away, but something you navigate around. I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. You don't have to be. You're still in the acute phase of grief. But it does get easier, I promise. The day comes when you wake up and realize you've built a life that doesn't revolve around their absence. You found new people, new purposes, new joys. The hole they left doesn't disappear, but it stops defining everything else. That night, Lying in my Renaissance bed beneath frescoed ceilings, I thought about what Diane had said. Could I build a life that didn't revolve around Theodore's absence? Could I find purpose and joy even with this gaping wound in my heart? I didn't have answers, but as I drifted off to sleep, I realized that I was already doing it. This trip, these friendships I'd made, the beauty I was experiencing every day, this was life happening despite loss, not in denial of it, but alongside it. The next morning, I woke with renewed determination. I had 10 more days in Italy before I had to face the mess waiting for me in Portland. I was going to make every single one of them count. My first stop was the Accademia Gallery, home to Michelangelo's David. I arrived early, before the crowds became overwhelming, and stood in the long gallery leading up to the statue, looking at the unfinished sculptures that line the walls, figures emerging from rough marble, half-formed but struggling toward completion. And then I turned the corner, and there he was. Nothing, no photograph, no description, no amount of preparation could have readied me for the reality of standing in front of that 17-foot marble giant. David stood there in perfect contrapposto, slingshot over his shoulder, eyes focused on some distant threat, every muscle and tendon rendered in stone with impossible precision. I stood there for I don't know how long, just looking. Other tourists flowed around me, taking photos and moving on, but I couldn't move. There was something about the statue, this young man frozen in the moment before battle, vulnerable and powerful at the same time, that felt deeply personal. David wasn't shown in his moment of triumph, having already defeated Goliath. He was shown before the fight, in the moment of decision, when he chose to face something larger and more powerful than himself. I thought about my own Goliath, the expectations that tried to make me small, the manipulation that tried to make me useful, the family dynamics that tried to cage me. And I thought about the moment I bought that plane ticket, packed my bags, and chose freedom over comfort. He's something, isn't he? I turned to find an elderly man standing beside me, leaning on a carved wooden cane. He had to be in his 80s, with a deeply lined face and eyes that crinkled with warmth. He's extraordinary, I agreed.
I come here every time I'm in Florence. I've seen him dozens of times, and it never gets old. He gestured at the statue with his cane. You know what I love most about him? He's not perfect. Look at his hands. They're too large, disproportionate. His head is slightly oversized. Michelangelo made deliberate choices to emphasize David's humanity, his vulnerability. I didn't know that. Most people don't. They see the perfect marble body and think it's about physical perfection, but it's really about courage, despite imperfection. David was just a shepherd boy, too small for King Saul's armor, armed with nothing but a slingshot. He shouldn't have won, but he did, because he had the courage to show up anyway. The old man smiled at me. Forgive an old professor for lecturing. My students used to say I couldn't help myself. Please, lecture away. I'm learning more from you than from the audio guide. We ended up spending the next hour walking through the gallery together. His name was Professor Antonio Rossi, retired from the University of Florence, where he'd taught art history for 40 years. He was in his 80s, but still sharp as a tack, with stories about every painting and sculpture that brought them to life in ways I'd never imagined. You were traveling alone? He asked as we sat on a bench in front of a Botticelli. Yes, first time doing solo international travel. Brava! At what age, if you don't mind my asking? 70. His face lit up with delight. Magnifico! You know what they say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. The same is true for adventures. I found myself telling him about Francis, about the promise I'd made, about the trip that had nearly didn't happen. I didn't mention Theodore or the theft. That felt too raw, too complicated. But I told him about the pressure I'd faced to stay home, to be useful,
To act my age. Act your age, he repeated thoughtfully. What does that even mean? I'm 84 years old. Should I act like I'm waiting to die? Should I stop learning, stop exploring, stop finding joy and beauty? He gestured around the gallery. This is acting my age, experiencing art, sharing knowledge, meeting interesting people like you. Age is just the number of years you've survived. How you live those years is entirely up to you. We exchanged contact information before parting ways. He insisted I email him if I ever returned to Florence, promising to show me the real city that tourists never saw. As I watched him walk away, cane tapping against the marble floor, I thought about the different models of aging I'd encountered on this trip. There was Vivienne's version, where 70 meant diminishment, incapacity, end-of-life planning, where aging parents were burdens to be managed, useful only for their service. And then there was Professor Rossi, Diane, and Patricia, and all the other vibrant older adults I'd met who refused to treat age as a prison sentence, who kept learning, traveling, experiencing, growing. I knew which model I wanted to follow. That afternoon, I climbed to the top of the Duomo, 463 steps, spiraling up inside the narrow passage between the dome's inner and outer shells. My knees protested, my breath came hard, and I had to stop several times to rest. But I made it to the top, emerging onto the exterior gallery with sweaty hair and burning lungs, and the most incredible view of Florence spread out below me. A young couple in their 20s stood nearby, the woman bent over and panting. "I'm dying," she gasped dramatically. "I'm too out of shape for this." Her boyfriend laughed. "You're 24, babe. If you can't do it now, imagine trying at 40. I wanted to tell them that I was 70 and I'd just climbed the same stairs they had, that age wasn't the disability they thought it was, that their casual dismissal of older people's capabilities was both ignorant and cruel. Instead, I just smiled and took photos of the view, savoring my private victory. That evening, I found an internet cafe and finally responded to some of the emails that had been piling up. One was from my former supervisor at the hospital where I'd worked for 30 years before retiring. She'd heard through mutual friends about my Italy trip and wanted to congratulate me. "Margaret, I heard you finally made it to Italy. I'm so proud of you for going, especially after everything you've been through. You were always the one taking care of everyone else, your patients, your colleagues, your son. It's about time you took care of yourself. I also heard that things with Theodore have been difficult. I just want you to know that you have friends here who support you, whatever happens. You gave that boy everything, and if he can't appreciate that, it's his loss. Enjoy every moment of your adventure. You've earned it. With love, Sandra." I sat there staring at the screen, tears blurring my vision. I'd been so focused on the immediate crisis, the theft, the betrayal, the legal complications, that I hadn't thought about how the news would spread through my community back home. People would talk. They would take sides. Some would probably blame me. What kind of mother raises a thief? What did I do wrong? Others would pity me, which somehow felt worse than blame. But Sandra's email reminded me that I also had people who knew me, who'd worked alongside me for decades, and who understood that I'd been a good mother and that Theodore's choices were his own. I wrote back, keeping it brief.
"Thank you for your kindness. Italy is everything I hoped it would be. I'm seeing beautiful things, meeting wonderful people, and learning that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Whatever happens with Theodore, I know I did my best. Sometimes your best isn't enough, and you have to make peace with that. I'll tell you all about it when I get back. Maybe over coffee at that place we used to go to after night shifts? With gratitude, Margaret. Over the next few days, I threw myself into experiencing Florence with an intensity that surprised me. I spent hours in the Uffizi Gallery, standing in front of Botticelli's Birth of Venus until the crowds thinned and I could really see it. Not just the famous image I'd seen reproduced 1,000 times, but the actual painting, with its layers of tempera and gold leaf, its delicate brushwork, its 500-year-old colors still luminous. I walked across the Ponte Vecchio at sunset, stopping at each jewelry shop to admire the craftsmanship, even though I couldn't afford to buy anything. I climbed up to Piazza Le Michelangelo and watched the city light up as darkness fell, the Duomo's dome glowing against the purple sky. I ate gelato every day, sometimes twice a day, sampling flavors I'd never heard of. Fig and walnut, rosemary and lemon, dark chocolate with sea salt. I bought a leather journal from a family-run shop near Santa Croce, and the elderly artisan who sold it to me stamped my initials into the cover while telling me about his grandfather who'd started the business after World War II. I went to a cooking class in a villa outside the city and learned to make fresh pasta from a grandmother who spoke no English but communicated entirely through gestures, taste tests, and the occasional swat with a wooden spoon when my technique wasn't quite right. And every evening, I wrote postcards. Not just to Theodore and Vivienne anymore, though I still sent them one every few days, brief notes about the beauty I was experiencing, never mentioning the legal situation, just proof that I was thriving without them. I also sent postcards to Sandra and my other friends back home, to Diane and Patricia and the other women I'd met in Rome, comparing notes about our adventures, to Professor Rossi, thanking him for the art history lesson and the reminder that age was no excuse for stopping learning. On my 4th day in Florence, my phone rang with a number I recognized. Sophia Chen, Celeste's attorney. Mrs. Hardwell, I hope I'm not interrupting your vacation. It's fine. What's happening? I wanted to update you on the case. Theodore and Ms. Laurent were formally charged yesterday. Elder abuse, theft, forgery, and fraud. They're both out on bail, but there are conditions. Neither can contact Celeste, and they can't access any of the accounts that contain disputed funds. How is Celeste? Angry, hurt, determined to see this through. She asked me to tell you that the guest house offer still stands when you return. Thank you. I'll take her up on it. There's something else. Theodore's attorney has been trying to negotiate a plea deal. Part of their strategy involves claiming that Theodore was manipulated by Ms. Laurent, that he didn't fully understand what was happening. Do you believe that? Sophia paused. The evidence suggests he was an active participant. But even if he was manipulated to some degree, he still made choices. He still signed documents, moved money, and benefited from the theft. Manipulation doesn't absolve responsibility. No, I agreed. It doesn't. His attorney also asked if you might be willing to provide a character reference. Talk about how a good person he is, how this is out of character for him. I felt the trap closing around me again. The expectation that as his mother, I should defend him no matter what he'd done. What did you tell them? I said I'd ask you. But Mrs. Hartwell, I want to be clear. You have no obligation to help Theodore avoid consequences for his actions. This isn't about whether he's a good person. It's about whether he committed crimes. And the evidence says he did. I won't lie for him, I said firmly. If the court asks me to testify about his character, I'll tell the truth. That he was a kind boy who grew into someone I don't recognize, someone who prioritized money over integrity, someone who used his own mother as cover for elder abuse. That's not a character reference. That's just honesty. That's all anyone can ask for, Sophia said quietly. After we hung up, I sat in my hotel room feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. In less than a week, I'd have to leave Italy, return to Portland,
face the legal proceedings and the family wreckage, and the questions everyone would have. But I had today. I had right now. I had this moment of sitting in a Renaissance palazzo in Florence with a journal full of memories and a heart that was broken but still beating. I opened Frances's journal and wrote, Day 15. They want me to save him. To say he's a good person who made mistakes, to help him avoid the consequences of stealing from an old woman. They think because I'm his mother, I have to protect him from his own choices. But Frances, you taught me something important in those last days of your life. You taught me that love doesn't mean enabling, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the natural consequences of their actions. That protecting someone from reality isn't kindness, it's cruelty in disguise. I love my son. I always will, but I won't lie to save him from himself.
Tomorrow, I'm taking a day trip to Siena. You always wanted to see the Piazza del Campo, to stand in that shell-shaped square and imagine the medieval horse races. I'll take pictures for you. I'll throw a coin in every fountain I pass. I'll live for both of us. And when I go home, I'll face whatever comes with the same courage you showed facing cancer. Not with bitterness or defeat, but with dignity and honesty and the knowledge that I did the right thing, even when it hurt. The next morning, I boarded a bus to Siena with a group tour I'd booked on a whim. The guide was a young Italian woman named Francesca, who spoke enthusiastically about medieval history and made jokes about the ancient rivalry between Siena and Florence. As we drove through the Tuscan countryside, past rolling hills covered in vineyards and olive groves, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing, exactly. The wound was too fresh for that, but a kind of acceptance. Theodore had made his choices. I'd made mine. And whatever happened next, I would face it as someone who had chosen integrity over comfort, truth over convenience, freedom over family obligation. The bus crested a hill, and there was Siena spread out before us, all red brick and medieval towers rising from the landscape like something out of a dream. Beautiful, yes? Francesca said over the microphone. Siena reminds us that some things, beauty, history, truth, they survive everything. Wars, plagues, political upheaval. They endure. I would endure too, I thought. Broken, but standing. Hurt, but free. And that would have to be enough. The flight back to Portland felt longer than the one to Rome, weighed down by everything waiting for me on the other end. I'd spent my last days in Italy on the Amalfi Coast, just as I'd planned, walking the cliff-top paths between Posicano and Ravello, eating lemon granata in coastal cafes, watching the Mediterranean turn from turquoise to sapphire as the sun set. I'd thrown coins in every fountain I'd found, making wishes for Frances, for myself, for even Theodore, wishing he'd find the courage to face what he'd done with honesty rather than excuses. Now, as the plane descended through the clouds toward Portland, I could see the city spreading out below me, the Willamette River snaking through downtown, Mount Hood snow-capped in the distance, the life I'd left behind rushing up to meet me. Celeste had sent a car to pick me up from the airport. The driver, a quiet man named Robert, loaded my suitcase into a black sedan and drove me not to Theodore's neighborhood, but to the Eastern Hills, where properties sat on acres of land behind gates and long driveways. The Laurent estate was even more impressive than I remembered from Amara's engagement party. But this time, instead of pulling up to the main house, Robert drove past it to a small cottage tucked among Douglas firs at the edge of the property. It was charming. White clapboard siding, blue shutters, a front porch with rocking chairs overlooking a small garden. "Mrs. Laurent had it prepared for you," Robert said as he set my suitcase on the porch. "She said to settle in and come to the main house for dinner at 7 if you're up to it." After he left, I stood on that porch for a long moment looking at this place that would be my temporary home.
It was beautiful, private, more than I dared hoped for. But it also represented the complete severing of my relationship with Theodore. I wasn't staying with my son anymore. I was staying with the woman he'd robbed. Inside, the guest house was simply but elegantly furnished, a living area with a fireplace, a small kitchen, a bedroom with a comfortable-looking bed, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. On the kitchen counter sat a welcome basket with fresh bread, local cheese, fruit, and a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir with a note. Margaret, welcome home. Take your time settling in. No pressure for dinner if you're too tired. Celeste. I unpacked slowly, hanging my clothes in the closet, arranging my toiletries in the bathroom, setting Frances's journal on the nightstand. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry. Not the angry tears of betrayal or the frightened tears of uncertainty, but the exhausted tears of someone who had fought a battle and survived, even if victory looked nothing like what they had imagined. At 7 o'clock, I walked through the garden path to the main house. Celeste answered the door herself, wearing casual slacks and a soft cardigan, a far cry from the imperious figure I'd met months ago at Theodore's house. Margaret, she stepped back to let me in. How was your trip? Transformative, I said honestly. We ate dinner in her informal dining room, nothing like the formal setup from that awful night at Theodore's. This was comfortable, intimate, two women sharing a meal and the strange bond of mutual betrayal. The trial is set for October, Celeste said as we worked through a simple pasta dish her housekeeper had prepared. Both of them are pleading not guilty, which means this will drag on for months. I'm sorry. Don't be. I want it to go to trial. I want a public record of what they did. I want other elderly people to see that this kind of exploitation has consequences. She took a sip of wine. Theodore's attorney contacted me through intermediaries. They're offering full restitution plus interest if I drop the charges. Will you?
No, her voice was firm. This isn't about money. It's about accountability. They need to face a judge and jury. They need to hear themselves described as what they are, criminals who preyed on family members. I nodded, understanding completely. Theodore's been calling me, I admitted, from different numbers since I blocked his main one, leaving voicemails. The messages started apologetic, but they've gotten more desperate, then angry. The last one accused me of destroying his life by not helping him. Are you going to respond? No. What would I say? That I forgive him? I don't. That I'll help him avoid consequences? I won't. I set down my fork. He's my son, and I love him, but I don't like who he's become. And until he takes real responsibility, not just apologizing because he got caught, but actually understanding the harm he caused, there's nothing to talk about. Celeste studied me across the table. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. So are you. When we first met, I thought you were cold and dismissive. Now I realize you were just protected. Wealthy people have to be, I suppose. Everyone wants something from you. Including my own daughter, she laughed bitterly. The irony is that I would have given Vivian money if she'd asked. Not $120,000 perhaps, but I would have helped with the wedding, with their house, with whatever they needed. Instead, she chose to steal it, to lie to me, to make me feel like a generous matriarch while she picked my pockets. Why do you think they did it that way? Celeste considered the question. Control, maybe. When I give someone money as a gift, it comes with my awareness, my potential judgment about how they use it. When they steal it, they feel clever, powerful. They've taken what they wanted without having to admit need or accept conditions. And there's probably something about the thrill of it. Getting away with something, fooling people. Vivian always did like feeling smarter than everyone else. We talked late into the evening about our children, about aging, about the strange relief of having our illusions shattered. Celeste told me about her marriage, about building a life with a man who'd ultimately left her for a younger woman, about raising Vivian alone, and perhaps overcompensating with money instead of attention.
I told her about Theodore's father, about the years of struggling as a single mother, about the pride I'd felt watching my son succeed, and the growing unease as that success seemed to change who he was. Do you think we failed them as mothers? I think we did our best with what we knew and who we were at the time, but our best wasn't enough to prevent them from making terrible choices. And maybe that's the hardest lesson, that you can be a good parent and still end up with adult children who disappoint you. To disappointing children, Celeste raised her wine glass with dark humor. To surviving them, I countered, and we clinked glasses. 2 weeks later, I was called to give a deposition for the district attorney's case. I sat in a conference room with lawyers on both sides and answered questions about my living situation with Theodore and Vivienne, about what I had observed, about what I'd known and when. Theodore's attorney tried to paint me as confused, as someone whose age made her memories unreliable. But I had my receipts, literally. I'd kept records of my expenses while staying with them, proof that I'd paid my own way. I had emails showing the temporary nature of my stay. I had my Italy itinerary showing I'd planned the trip long before the supposed financial support for me had begun. The evidence was clear. I'd never received stolen money. I'd been a prop in their story, nothing more. As I left the deposition, I passed Theodore in the hallway. He was thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. "Mom," he said, stepping toward me. I stopped, waiting. "Please, we need to talk. I've said everything I need to say in my deposition. I know you're angry, but if you just listen, Vivienne manipulated me. I didn't fully understand what was happening. I trusted her. You signed the documents, Theodore. You moved the money. You used it for your vacations and your lifestyle. Whatever Vivienne did or didn't tell you, you knew that money was coming from somewhere, and you chose not to ask questions because the answer might have been inconvenient." His face flushed. "You're my mother. You're supposed to be on my side." "I am on your side, the side that wants you to grow up, take responsibility, and become a better person. But I won't lie to help you avoid consequences. That's not love. That's enabling. So you're just going to let them send me to prison? I'm going to let you face the natural results of your choices. What happens after that is up to you and the courts." I walked away, and he didn't follow me. The trial took place in October, as Celeste had said. I attended several days of proceedings, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching my son be exposed as a thief. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged signatures, emails discussing how to move money without triggering fraud alerts, text messages about expensive purchases. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. Theodore got 3 years in prison, eligible for parole after 18 months. Vivienne got 5 years, her sentence longer because she had held power of attorney and had a greater responsibility to protect Celeste's interests. I wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I was in my guest house, making soup and listening to the rain on the roof. Celeste called to tell me, her voice steady but tired. "It's over."
Yes. How do you feel? Sad? Relieved? Free? I stirred the soup, watching vegetables swirl in the broth. How about you? The same. And grateful. For you, for your honesty, for this strange friendship we've built from the wreckage. After we hung up, I opened Frances's journal one last time and wrote, "The trial is over. Justice was served, though it doesn't feel like victory. My son will go to prison. His life will be marked by this forever. And I had a hand in that by refusing to lie for him. But Frances, I know you'd be proud of me, not for putting Theodore in prison. I take no pride in that. But for choosing truth over comfort, for valuing my integrity over family loyalty, for finally understanding that love doesn't mean protecting people from themselves. I'm 70 years old, living in a guest house on an estate, estranged from my only child. My life looks nothing like what I'd planned, but I'm free. I'm honest. I'm myself. And I'm already planning my next trip. Maybe Greece? You always wanted to see the Parthenon. Thank you for the gift of Italy. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to choose yourself. Until we meet again, Margaret. 6 months later, I stood at the Portland airport with a new suitcase and a ticket to Athens. Celeste had decided to come with me. We'd become unlikely companions, two women who lost their children but found themselves. As we waited to board, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mom, I start counseling next week. Prison program for financial crimes. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, I'm glad you're getting help. That's the first step. I hope you find your way back to being someone you can be proud of. I still love you. That hasn't changed. I didn't say I'd visit. I didn't promise reconciliation, but I left the door open. Not wide open, but slightly ajar. Because that's what love looks like sometimes. Not unconditional enabling, but conditional hope. Hope that requires growth, change, genuine remorse. Everything okay? Celeste asked. Yes, everything's okay. Our flight was called. As we joined the line to board, I thought about the postcards I'd sent from Italy, those cheerful notes from Rome that had announced my freedom, my refusal to be diminished. This time I wouldn't need to send postcards as proof of my liberation. I'd already proven that to myself. The gate agent scanned my boarding pass and smiled. Enjoy your trip. I will, I said, and meant it completely. As the plane lifted off, I looked out the window at Portland disappearing below, the city holding my broken family, my complicated past, my son in prison learning to face what he'd done. But I was moving forward. Not away from pain, but toward life, toward beauty and friendship, and the endless possibility of reinvention. At 70, I was finally becoming who I was always meant to be, and that was more than enough.